Ever wondered why ancient Egyptians worshipped cats? Join us as we delve into the fascinating history of these feline deities and uncover the secrets behind their enduring reverence. The desert night is warm and strange. You walk slowly through a stony alley between crumbling mud brick walls, guided only by the flickering glow of an oil lamp. Somewhere ahead, soft purring echoes against the stone. At first, you think it's your imagination, but no. As you round a corner, you see it. A cat, sitting perfectly still, waiting at the towering gates of a temple. She's not just any cat. Her fur is impossibly clean, white with hints of golden brown, and around her neck is a collar of turquoise beads and delicate gold links. She looks up at you, then back at the temple as if to say, "Took you long enough." Inside, robed priests bow not to a statue or a high priest, but to her. Incense rises in slow coils. Bells chime. She pads past them all like royalty, tail high. You've just met one of ancient Egypt's most sacred beings, the temple cat. So before you jump into this sleepy story, please take a moment to like my videos and subscribe to my channel, but only if you actually enjoy and feel comfortable with the stories I tell here. And hey, drop a comment with your local time and where you're listening from. I love seeing how far this cozy little caravan travels. Now lie down and relax. Turn off the lights. Maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's start ancient echo-boring journey together tonight. You tiptoe behind the cat into the temple, half afraid you'll be scolded for following her. But no one stops you. This is her world, and for now, you're just a sleepy observer. Cats in ancient Egypt weren't just pets. They were living links to the divine, wandering embodiments of goddesses like Bastet and Sekhmet. You'd think being a pharaoh made you top of the food chain, but nope. If a temple cat wanted your seat, you'd move, probably with a smile, because hurting or disrespecting a cat wasn't just rude. It was illegal, sacrilegious, and potentially curse-worthy. And here's where things get strange. These cats weren't trained or leashed. They weren't even technically owned. They just were. They chose to hang out in temples. They chose to sleep near altars. And when they flicked their tails a certain way or twitched their whiskers in disapproval, grown men in ornate gold headdresses would panic like schoolboys caught skipping class. Historians still argue whether cats were actively trained to act divine in temples, or if Egyptians simply projected holiness onto them after seeing how effortlessly smug they looked sitting on altar steps. Either way, the reverence was real. You step deeper into the temple and spot carvings of cats all along the columns. Sleek forms in profile, tails curling like question marks. Some have lotus flowers in their mouths. Others are shown standing beneath protective wings. One even has a pharaoh kneeling before it, as if asking permission to continue ruling. The air smells of crushed herbs and warm sand. You hear soft chanting and gentle scratching. Yes, that cat is now kneading a velvet pillow in front of a shrine. One priest offers her a tiny platter of roasted fish while another lights a fresh brazier. You're starting to realize this is her temple. The people, just very lucky tenants. In daily Egyptian life, cats were protectors, not just spiritually, but practically. They kept grain stores free of mice, homes safe from snakes, and hearts warm with their sleepy purring. People believed cats had a connection to the afterlife. If a cat looked at you too long, you might wonder what it saw in your soul. If it followed you, maybe a blessing was near, or maybe a ghost. One fringe belief that's popped up in obscure scrolls and local tales, that some temple cats could speak, but only once in a lifetime. Imagine that, growing up around a temple cat who's ignored you for years. only to have it look you dead in the eye on your worst day and whisper, "Don't forget the offering." You'd either faint or start buying sardines by the crate. Outside, the sun rises red over the desert, but in this quiet temple, nothing stirs but the cat. She curls into a ball on the altar, tail wrapped over her nose. Everyone breathes easier. You find a spot on a cool stone bench and lie back. The cat opens one eye, watching, as if judging your posture, as if silently declaring, "Good, now stay there." And you do, because something about this place tells you, when cats ruled Egypt, the world might have been just a little more orderly. The stone bench is surprisingly comfortable. At least, comfortable enough that you don't mind lying flat on your back, staring up at the painted ceiling of the temple while that smug temple cat continues her nap just a few feet away. You half expect her to start snoring. Instead, she rolls over and begins grooming herself as if she knows a dozen people are watching her, and she just doesn't care. She's too divine for that. Eventually, you're ushered out by a yawning priest, and the morning light blinds you as you step into the desert sun. The city beyond the temple buzzes with life. Wooden carts creak along dusty roads. Sellers call out the price of dates and onions, and children run barefoot past you, their laughter echoing off the mud brick walls. You follow the crowd down toward the outskirts of the city, where the river Nile glimmers and something more mysterious waits. Something both eerie and a little ridiculous. You see a low, sunken doorway carved into the side of a hill. No guards. No signs. Just an old man sitting on a rock, peeling dried figs and humming. He looks up at you and gestures inside with a single crooked finger. "They're waiting," he says. You duck into the darkness and blink as your eyes adjust. First, it's hard to make out. Shelves? No, altars. Row after row, stacked from floor to ceiling, and resting on each one, neatly lined up, are cat mummies. Hundreds of them. They're wrapped in linen like tiny pharaohs, some with intricate geometric patterns, others with painted faces. One even has tiny glass beads for eyes, wide and slightly unsettling. You wander past them slowly, as if walking through a royal tomb, because in a way you are. Cats in ancient Egypt weren't just buried. They were mummified, blessed, perfumed, and sometimes even interred in their own sarcophagi. These weren't accidental preservations. This was full-on ritual treatment, and archaeologists still uncover entire cat cemeteries, some containing thousands of feline remains, like ancient Egyptian Costco, but for worship and fur. And here's the kicker. These weren't just cats who had lived in temples. Some were bred specifically to be sacrificed and mummified for religious offerings. Imagine an entire economy built on raising divine cats. The cat cult industry was so booming, it almost felt like a furry pyramid scheme. You come to a section where the mummies are adorned with golden collars and tiny amulets. Fish, ankhs, protective eyes. One even has a teeny little scarab beetle carved from turquoise resting beneath its linen chin. Your inner voice goes, "That is the most pampered corpse I've ever seen." Historians still argue whether the average Egyptian saw these feline funerals as practical devotion or as social expectation. Was it personal grief, religious necessity, or just the ancient version of keeping up with the neighbors? The Hoteps next door gave their cat a whole limestone coffin. Guess we better do 2 amulets. You move deeper into the burial chamber and notice something stranger. Several feline mummies are placed beside human ones. Not in a creepy, ritualistic way, more like a parent and child sharing an eternal nap. In one corner lies the tomb of a priestess, with her beloved cat curled beside her feet. The inscription reads, "May Bastet welcome her in dreams, as she once welcomed this one into her arms." And just when you think you've hit peak weirdness, you spot a tiny cat sarcophagus carved from dark basalt. On the lid is a carved image of the goddess Bastet, not as a woman with a cat's head, but as a fully feline figure, sitting proudly atop a pile of defeated serpents and rats. She has a sly smile. You feel like she's judging your sleep schedule. One fringe belief recorded by a Roman visitor to Egypt mentions that certain cat mummies were thought to glow faintly in moonlight, proof of their blessed status. Another theory, only found in a half-legible papyrus, is that some cats were buried with tiny golden mirrors to help them find the sun in the afterlife. You squint toward a high alcove. There, perched like some kind of ghostly overseer, is a taxidermied cat so lifelike you half expect it to leap down and sweat you. Maybe it did once. Maybe it still does to the wrong guests. You back slowly toward the exit, careful not to disturb the silence. The cats here may be long dead, but the vibe is very much alive. As you step back into the sunlight, you find yourself instinctively bowing. Not to the priest or the gods or even the ancient structure, but to the cat. Because in Egypt, the cats didn't just die with dignity. They died like kings. You're still thinking about that glowing cat mummy when your feet guide you through a dusty side alley, past markets filled with garlic, linen, and a surprising amount of honey. You duck under a sun-bleached awning and hear the unmistakable sound of a story being told. An elder woman, her back bent with years and wisdom, sits surrounded by wide-eyed children. Her hands dance as she speaks, not in modern words, but the deep, poetic cadences of ancient myth. You slip into the shadows nearby and listen. Tonight's tale? Sekhmet. You've probably heard of her, lioness-headed, war-hungry, and, according to this old tale, almost responsible for the end of humanity. Sekhmet wasn't your average house cat. She was the original chaos. Fierce, regal, and, according to lore, so unstoppable that when the sun god Ra sent her to punish humanity for their disobedience, she went a little overboard. You imagine it. You, a regular citizen of ancient Egypt, waking up to find the rivers red, crops flattened, and a huge lion-headed goddess roaring through the city like a one-woman apocalypse. Not ideal. The myth says Sekhmet's fury was endless, until Ra tricked her. In one of the oldest known "Please Don't Destroy Us" hacks, priests dyed thousands of jugs of beer blood red and poured them into the fields. Sekhmet, seeing what she assumed was a buffet of divine vengeance, drank it all and promptly passed out. Woke up later a little tipsy, a little confused, and poof, her wrath dissolved. The next day, she was calmer, gentler, almost like a new goddess entirely. Some say that's when Bastet, the soft, graceful cat goddess of the hearth, emerged from Sekhmet's shadows. Two sides of the same divine coin. One roared, the other purred. Historians still argue whether Sekhmet and Bastet were always meant to be separate deities, or if they represent evolving attitudes in Egyptian society. War to peace, wrath to care, lioness to house cat. But here's the weird fringe part. Some fringe scrolls, likely ritual manuals, suggest drinking red beer during certain festivals was seen as a way to fool Sekhmet again, keep her spirit chill, like giving a goddess her emotional support beverage. And every year during the Feast of Drunkenness, people did just that. Imagine a massive, state-sanctioned day of drinking where the goal was to outdrink a lion goddess so she wouldn't destroy the world. You're pretty sure you've seen something similar on college campuses, minus the divine implications. You peer down at a carving along the side of a nearby home. It shows Sekhmet towering and wild-eyed, clutching a scepter in one hand, and oddly, a small kitten in the other. Nobody talks about that part of the myth, but there it is. Even the most fearsome of gods needed something soft, something quiet, something to remind them the world wasn't always meant to burn. The woman finishes her story, and the children erupt into nervous giggles. One of them clutches a little painted wooden cat like a protective charm. You leave the square and walk toward the edge of town, where the desert meets the floodplain. It's quieter here. The moon hangs low. The stars blink lazily. You hear a purring sound again, but this time it's coming from a sandstone statue nearly as tall as you. Bastet, graceful and sharp-eyed, watches you through centuries of wind and worship. At her feet, someone has left an offering. A garland of papyrus flowers, a bowl of milk, and, curiously, a perfectly roasted fish. You wonder if she's still hungry, or maybe she's already eaten. With gods, it's hard to tell. One final fringe belief drifts into your mind. An obscure prayer etched into the back wall of a provincial temple. May she come to your home purring and leave your enemies confused. Not smited, not defeated, just confused. You like that. Divine mischief, wrapped in fur. The wind picks up. Sand skitters across your feet. Somewhere behind you, someone's lighting a torch, and a cat-shaped shadow stretches down the street. You smile and keep walking, because in a land where gods roar like lions or nap like kittens, you know exactly where this story is headed next, and it's probably judging your haircut. You're not sure when you started yawning, but now it's hard to stop. The sun's dipped low, turning the Nile into a glittering strip of fire, and you've wandered into a quieter part of the village, where the houses are lower, the courtyards shaded, and the breeze smells like baking bread and date syrup. You're invited into a modest mud brick home. The matron of the house greets you with a tired smile and gestures toward a sleeping mat. But just as you start to sit, you freeze. Someone's already there. Correction. Something. A large tabby cat, sprawled on the woven blanket like it owns the place. You blink at her. She blinks back, slow and smug. The matron chuckles. That's minute. If she likes you, you'll sleep well. If not, she shrugs. Expect to wake up with sand in your mouth. You take a gamble and sit beside her. Menet stretches, yawns, revealing a row of sharp little teeth, and then curls up beside you, as if granting permission. You relax, because in ancient Egypt, to share your home with a cat wasn't just convenience. It was a blessing. Cats were protectors of the hearth, guardians of sleep, and, according to more than a few very dramatic scrolls, supernatural sentinels against nightmares. There's a curious mainstream belief in households of the time. If a cat chose to sleep at your feet, it meant your dreams would be watched by Bastet herself. But if it slept on your chest, you were being judged, or warned. You glanced down at Menet, now fast asleep, pressed firmly against your ribs. Great. The room is dim and warm, lit only by a tiny oil lamp on the wall. You hear the hum of family life, laughter, clattering pottery, a small argument over whether it's too hot for soup. But somehow, it's all muted under the steady presence of this dozing feline. One of the boys of the house runs in, scurries toward a jug of water, and immediately stops short when he sees Menet. He tiptoes backward and whispers, "She's watching the corners tonight." That phrase again, "watching the corners," is a common household saying here. The belief that cats don't just guard people, they guard the thresholds, between light and shadow, between the world of the living and the lurking of something else. Historians still argue whether this belief stemmed from real behavior, cats staring into empty spaces, reacting to things humans couldn't see, or if it was just the mystique of their silent movements and glowing eyes in the dark. You hear stories from your hosts. How once, when a child was feverish and restless, the house cat jumped onto his bed and purred steadily until the boy calmed. How another time, when a thief snuck into the courtyard, the family woke to the sound of their cat hissing wildly, long before any human heard a thing. Then there's the fringe belief you hear whispered between bites of lentil stew. Cats can absorb illness, not in a figurative way. Literally absorb it through touch, through purring, through curling around your head when you're too weak to speak. No one explains where the illness goes. That's the part they don't like to talk about. You glance back down. Menet is still asleep, but her ears twitch as if catching secrets from the walls. Outside, someone lights a street torch, and a soft amber glow spills into the home. Shadows stretch long across the floor. Menet's tail flicks once, then stills. The matron places a small offering bowl by the doorway. A splash of water, 3 crushed mint leaves, and a single dried fish. For her, she says, or the one who walks with her. You try not to overthink that phrase. As the family drifts off to sleep, you lie back on your mat. The room smells of linen, oil, and old wood. Menet's fur brushes against your arm. You hear one last sleepy whisper from someone near the door. Don't move too much. She'll bite if you dream too loud. You smile just a little, because in a land where even your dreams have chaperones, there's something oddly comforting about knowing your night guard has whiskers. You wake before dawn to the soft, rhythmic sound of paw steps on the tile. Menet is gone. You sit up groggily, rubbing sleep from your eyes, and catch a glimpse of her tail slipping through a reed-curtained doorway. Naturally, you follow because apparently you've been enchanted by a cat like some common mortal in a temple romance scroll. You step outside into the chill of early morning, where fog coils low over the courtyards and the streets are still. Most of the city sleeps, but not you, and definitely not the cats. You trail Menet through alleyways until you reach the edge of a broad avenue, one that leads to the legendary city of Bastet, or at least what remains of it. The stones here hum with memory, and the broken columns still bear traces of feline carvings worn smooth by centuries of sand and reverence. Bastet was once the spiritual headquarters of the Bastet cult, the ultimate cat city. Pilgrims came from all across Egypt to celebrate festivals, leave offerings, and, strangely, smuggle cats. Yes, smuggling, of the feline variety. You follow Menet through a narrow passageway in a wall, ducking beneath a collapsed lintel. On the other side is what looks like an old customs gate, half swallowed by earth. A fresco nearby shows a very serious official holding a cat under one arm and pointing an accusatory finger at a sheepish-looking traveler. The caption translates to, "No unauthorized removal of sacred animals." Cats weren't just admired, they were national property. Removing one from Egypt without permission was sacrilege. Treason, even. There's a famous historical account from Greek historian Herodotus, who might have exaggerated a lot, but still, where he describes a scene in which a foreigner who accidentally killed a cat was mobbed to death by a crowd. No trial, no warnings, just claws out justice. The weirdest part? This wasn't even state policy. These were regular citizens so fiercely protective of their divine felines that they acted on instinct. Their cats were sacred, sure, but they were also theirs, Historians still argue whether this extreme public reaction was fueled by deeply held belief, mob psychology, or just the fear of cosmic retribution. Because there were rumors, oh yes, about what happened to people who messed with Egypt's cats. Fringe temple scrolls mention the curse of the whiskerless. Supposedly, any outsider who stole or harmed a cat would suffer humiliating misfortunes. Losing their voice in court, being mocked by children, or growing an unstoppable fear of mice. You pass what used to be a side shrine in Bastet and find the remains of a painted altar. Scratched into the base is the faded silhouette of a ship, a sailing boat, a smuggler's mark, perhaps left by someone who tried to spirit away a sacred feline under cover of darkness. Some cats did get out. There are cat mummies found far beyond Egypt's borders, in Cyprus, in Syria, even in early Greek sites. But whether they were stolen, gifted, or traded in secret, nobody knows. And those who smuggled them, they didn't talk about it. You imagine one such smuggler now. A nervous man rowing hard down a Nile tributary, hiding a meowing bundle under a basket of onions. One wrong sound and he's toast. Or worse, cursed to sneeze whenever he hears purring. You hear a soft chirp. Menet is now perched on a fragment of broken column, looking directly at you with her wide, knowing eyes. She hops down and pads silently through the rubble, past a crumbled temple doorway, and disappears. You don't follow this time. Something about the way she moves, the way the mist curls around her tail, makes you think you weren't following a normal cat at all. Maybe never were. Just another divine escort giving you a sleepy tour of her ancient empire. You sit beside the altar a little longer, watching the mist lift, listening to the city breathe. And quietly, in the dust near your foot, you notice tiny paw prints. You're back in the city now, though city might be too generous a term for this sprawling tangle of mud brick, palm wood, and well-placed shade. The streets buzz with morning energy. Bread sellers slap loaves onto hot stones. Priests chant in their linen whites. Cats prowl under baskets, leap onto rooftops, and slink through doorways like they pay rent. But there's one figure they all stop for. She steps into the street from the entrance of a sanctuary. Tall, poised, radiant. Her hair is braided with beads, her kohl-rimmed eyes as sharp as obsidian. But what really catches your attention isn't her regal stride. It's the short, curved knife glinting at her hip, right below the emblem of Bastet on her sash. This is a Bastet priestess. And yes, she's carrying a blade. Because in this version of cat worship, reverence doesn't mean fragility. It means ferocity, with a smile. Bastet, contrary to modern misunderstanding, wasn't just the goddess of love and naps. She started as a lioness, a protector, and a fierce warrior who would eviscerate threats to the pharaoh like she was playing with yarn. Over time, her image softened, but her claws never really disappeared. You follow the priestess to a courtyard where a few acolytes gather, sweeping the stones and laying out offerings. Milk, incense, fish, and a weirdly specific collection of toys. Carved mice, rattles, feathered sticks. For the sacred ones, one whispers. Soon the cats come. Not dozens, hundreds. They emerge from alleyways, rooftops, and possibly thin air, curling around columns and rubbing up against statues. This isn't just a feeding. It's a ceremony. The priestess kneels, opens a polished wooden box, and removes a small obsidian blade. She cuts a sliver of salted fish, places it on a golden dish, and raises it toward the sun. And then she whispers something. No one else hears it, not even you. But a black cat, massive, scarred, eyes like gold coins, steps forward and eats from the dish like it's owed to him. You don't move, because here's what most people forget. Bastet may be the patron of women, music, fertility, and joy, but she's also a goddess of protection. That smile on her feline face has been sharpened over centuries. The knife the priestess carries? Not ceremonial, not decorative. There are accounts of temple guards trained not just in standard defense, but in fast, close-range combat designed to mimic feline strikes. One Roman source even claims Bastet's priestesses were taught how to incapacitate enemies with a single move, though historians still argue whether that was true or just ancient propaganda designed to scare tourists. Fringe tales say that during times of siege or unrest, cats from Bastet's temples would vanish, and when they reappeared, they'd be carrying notes, jewelry, or, in one wild case, a human tooth. A warning, perhaps, or a souvenir. You glance around the courtyard. The cats are all watching the priestess now, tails twitching in synchrony. Some are silent, some purring in rhythm like a sleepy war drum. The priestess turns slowly and begins a chant. It's low, musical, full of vowels and breath. Not loud, just enough to shift the air. And suddenly you get it. This is what worship looks like when it's a mutual agreement. The cats are not just being honored, they're responding, participating, enforcing a kind of balance that feels older than pyramids. The black cat walks past you and stops. He looks up, blinks. You try not to look away, because some deep, lizard part of your brain is whispering, if I flinch, I'm dead. Then he licks his paw and flops over like a sleepy baby seal, instantly defused. You exhale. One final weird detail catches your eye as the ceremony ends. Carved into a nearby wall is an inscription not in standard hieroglyphs, but a mix of symbols and scratched lines. A fringe priest might call it a spell, a scholar might say graffiti, but the message is clear. She smiles as she protects. She watches as she waits. Her claws are not lost. They are hidden. You back away from the courtyard, mind buzzing. In this world, softness is never weakness. And just because a goddess purrs, doesn't mean she won't cut you. You're starting to feel like a cat yourself, wandering without purpose, curling into new places, and occasionally being offered snacks by strangers. But as you head toward the royal district, a new rhythm pulses through the air. Drums, flutes, laughter that's just a bit too rehearsed. A palace courtyard opens before you, grand, polished, absurdly symmetrical. There are palm trees trimmed into unnatural shapes, fountains that gurgle with rose water, and peacocks wandering like they've lost their jobs but still want to feel important. But none of it compares to what you see lounging in the shade of the farthest colonnade. A young pharaoh, draped in gold, eyes outlined in perfect lines of kohl, and nestled comfortably on the seat beside him. Not a royal advisor, not a scribe, not even a concubine, but a particularly lazy-looking calico cat. She is sprawled on royal silk like she was born to do this, her paw resting on a scroll that someone is clearly trying and failing to retrieve. You creep closer, pretending to admire the architecture. The scroll, as it turns out, is a petition from a governor in a southern province. It's been ignored for hours, possibly days, because apparently the cat sat on it, and palace etiquette dictates that it must stay there until she moves. Welcome to the feline administration of ancient Egypt. You overhear an advisor whispering. He says the cat speaks to him sometimes. In dreams. He doesn't sound skeptical. There are historical accounts, half real, half suspiciously mythic, of pharaohs who claimed that their temple cats delivered messages from the gods. Some say these messages came in dreams, others through body language. A flicking tail meant war. A sneeze? Bad harvest. One particularly eccentric pharaoh, possibly Ramesses II, though historians still argue, reportedly kept a detailed cat diary, where he recorded his cat's actions each day as divine omens. She slept under the date tree. Therefore, I will not trust the Hittites today. That kind of logic. You're escorted further into the court, where servants dart between pillars carrying trays of food, and not all of it for humans. You spot an entire banquet spread set aside for the palace cats. Duck meat, honeyed fish, goat cheese, and what you swear is a tiny pyramid made entirely out of lentils. And the pharaoh? He doesn't seem embarrassed by any of it. In fact, he leans down to whisper something to his calico friend. She stares at him, unimpressed, then slowly stands, stretches with royal drama, and pads away, directly over the scroll. The advisor sighs in relief and grabs it. This is more than affection. This is statecraft. You imagine the logistics. Cabinet meetings delayed because the feline oracle is asleep. Foreign ambassadors forced to feed tuna to a yawning ginger tomcat before negotiations begin. Priests interpreting political decisions through which cat chose to nap on which cushion. Fringe writings from the late Middle Kingdom even describe a council of whisperers, a trio of palace cat handlers tasked with observing feline behavior and offering divine interpretations. Were they actual prophets, or just really enthusiastic cat dads? No one knows. You pass a mural on your way out of the hall. It shows a cat sitting atop a globe of stars, surrounded by symbols of power: ankh, scepter, crown. Below her, tiny humans bow in reverence. The caption reads, "From her mouth, the truth. From her eyes, the fate of kings." That's not metaphor. That's policy. And then you notice something even stranger. There are no statues of the pharaoh in the cat's courtyard. Only feline icons. Gold, lapis, obsidian. Some with offerings at their feet. All perfectly polished. You're starting to get the feeling that even in the place where ultimate power resides, no one, not even the living god king of Egypt, is actually in charge. You slip away quietly, passing one last small doorway etched with an inscription that stops you cold. He who hears the meow and listens rules. He who ignores it returns to dust. You believe it, because today you watched a government pause for a cat nap. By the time you reach the temple outskirts again, the sky has turned that sleepy blue-gray shade that only appears when the day begins folding into dusk. And just when you think you've seen every possible form of cat reverence, you walk right into a funeral procession. No, not for a human. The mourners, dozens of them, solemn and draped in linen, are carrying a small, finely carved sarcophagus. It's adorned with intricate images of lotus flowers, milk jugs, and rats with excess for eyes. Following behind are flute players, incense bearers, and a boy holding a tray of fish skewers, which he looks like he really wants to eat. You step aside to let the procession pass, watching in disbelief. The carved lid of the cat coffin shines with fresh lacquer. And behind the mourners, a woman with shaven eyebrows wipes her face and says softly, "He loved dates. He used to steal them right off the basket." You're not hearing things. This cat, recently deceased clearly, had a favorite snack, a burial plan, and what seems to be a grieving household. You follow from a respectful distance, past the temple gates and down a stone stairwell into a sacred hall lit by flickering oil lamps. The sarcophagus is placed on an alabaster pedestal, and one by one, The mourners approach, offering gifts. Flowers, fish, perfume, tiny linen pillows. Someone's even brought a tiny bronze statue of Bastet, cradling a kitten. The resemblance is uncanny. Then comes the part that really makes you blink. Each mourner, after leaving their offering, touches their hand to their eyebrows, or where their eyebrows used to be. Because in ancient Egypt, when your cat died, you shaved your eyebrows in mourning. That was the custom, a visible symbol of grief, recognized even by strangers. Historians still argue whether this eyebrow shaving practice was limited to elite households or if it was widespread among the general population. But the evidence is clear enough. Statues, murals, and more than one poorly drawn papyrus doodle show eyebrowless figures sobbing over a small feline-shaped mound. You sit quietly at the back of the hall. The air smells like cedar oil and rose resin. And just when you think the ritual is complete, a priest steps forward holding a small cup of milk. He pours it gently onto the floor in front of the altar. For the journey, he says. One fringe interpretation of feline funerals says this milk offering isn't just symbolic. It's meant to nourish the cat's ka, or spirit, on its path through the underworld. The better fed the ka, the easier the journey. And a well-fed cat spirit, much more likely to come back as a helpful guardian instead of, a vengeful one. Another whispery belief: if you offered your cat a golden bowl of milk in life, and then offered that same bowl in death, they would recognize you in the field of reeds and grant you one favor. One tiny, whispered miracle. You wonder how many people were secretly hoping for one more chance to fix something, just because their cat remembered them kindly. The priest concludes the ceremony with a short chant in Middle Egyptian, loosely translated as, "She protected our homes. May she rest beside the stars." And with that, the mourners begin to rise and leave, most in silence. A few quietly place coins into a donation jar by the exit. Funeral fees, you assume. But then you see a final gesture that stays with you. A girl, no older than 6, steps forward and gently places a single papyrus drawing at the foot of the coffin. It shows her and the cat curled up under a tree, both asleep. She's drawn them holding paws. You feel something in your chest, some mix of awe, grief, and warmth. These weren't just pets. These were companions, protectors, family. You step out into the cooling air and realize how strange this all would sound back home. Funerals for cats? Golden sarcophagi? Shaved eyebrows? But here in Egypt, it makes perfect sense. In a world filled with uncertainty, crocodile gods, and sandstorms that could eat a village whole, trusting your heart to a creature who purrs was the sanest thing you could do. Because when a cat curls up beside you, the world feels a little smaller, a little softer, and maybe, just maybe, a little more divine. The desert winds have died down by the time you make your way toward the banks of the Nile again. Moonlight slices across the slow-moving water, and a few lonely feluccas drift lazily in the distance. Crickets sing. Papyrus reeds rustel. Somewhere not far off, a cat yowls at absolutely nothing because, well, that's part of the job description. You find yourself at a small dock, where an old man in a reed hat tends a modest boat. He doesn't ask where you're going. He just nods and helps you aboard. The boat creaks as it rocks into the current, and before long, you're drifting south toward an island that, according to your guide, doesn't appear on many maps. "It's where the cats go," he mumbles, "when they've had enough of us." Naturally, you're intrigued. The island appears just as the sky begins to lighten. It's not large, maybe 2 or 3 acres, but the moment you step onto its soft, sandy shore, You feel something shift, a stillness, a weight, not heavy, but watchful. There are no monuments here.
No shrines.
No murals or statues, just cats. Hundreds of them, sleeping on rocks, climbing trees, sunbathing in glorious silence. A few blink at you. One yawns, as if annoyed you've interrupted something private. But they don't move to greet you, because this isn't your island. It's theirs. The old man remains in the boat. You wander up a narrow path worn into the earth, past tufts of wild grass and hollowed-out logs that double as nap spots. The further you go, the older the cats look. Thinner, grayer, fur fading like cloth in the sun. Some are clearly ancient, possibly older than you can justify with biology alone. And at the very center of the island, under the low branches of an acacia tree, you find her. A white cat, immense, regal, perfectly still. Her eyes are closed. She's breathing, but just barely. Wrapped around her is a circle of smaller cats, curled protectively against her. A living wreath. You don't speak. You can't speak, because this is something sacred. This is the retirement temple, though no one would ever call it that aloud. There are whispers about it in market stalls and dusty scrolls. A place where sacred cats go to end their days, not in temples, but in peace. No worshippers, no incense, just sun, silence, and sleep. Historians still argue whether this place was real or allegorical, a metaphor for the soul's rest after a life of divine service. But fringe theories abound. One even claims that cats who die here don't really die. They become spirits, return to Bastet herself, absorbed into her essence like drops into the Nile. You sit down on a nearby stone, afraid to even shift your weight too loudly. One small kitten toddles over and inspects your sandal, sniffs it. Then, in a gesture that feels like being knighted by a furball, he curls up on your foot and falls asleep. You take that as permission to stay. The sun climbs higher. The white cat shifts slightly, opens one golden eye, and looks at you. You feel understood, not judged, not praised, just seen. And if you were to ask anyone on this island if they could speak what gods look like, they wouldn't point to a statue or a painted wall. They'd point to her, because gods don't always roar. Sometimes they blink slowly and yawn. As you leave the island, the boat gliding silently over the water once more, the old man hands you something wrapped in cloth, a single white whisker. For protection, he says, almost embarrassed. Or just to remember. You tuck it into your pouch and say nothing. Because how do you explain to someone that you've just visited the retirement home of gods? By now, you've stopped trying to make sense of anything. Ancient Egypt has officially broken your logic compass. One moment you're stepping off a mythical island of divine felines. The next you're following the sound of laughter into what appears to be a festival dedicated entirely to cats. And not a quiet, incense-heavy ritual either. No, this is loud, colorful, slightly chaotic. Picture balloons, but made of dyed linen. Jugs of beer passed hand to hand. Fish roasting over open flames. Harpists playing upbeat tunes while children run around with wooden cat masks shouting, "She is watching! She is watching!" You're in the middle of the festival of Bastet, and it's equal parts religious rite, weekend market, and small-scale party riot. The festival was held annually in Bastet, and it wasn't just big. It was one of the largest gatherings in Egypt. According to ancient sources, again, probably exaggerated but still impressive, hundreds of thousands of pilgrims would arrive by boat, singing, dancing, and bringing lavish offerings to Bastet. You can see why. Stalls line the streets with cat-themed everything. Amulets shaped like feline eyes. Carved statues in obsidian and faience. Embroidered sashes with the words, Bastet protects my house in hieroglyphs. There's even a stall where a man is carefully applying kohl to the eyes of cats. Not people, actual cats. Better vision at night, he explains solemnly. You pause beside a group of older women gathered in a shaded corner, sipping date wine and sharing stories. My cat warned me about my third husband, one says, nodding. Mine predicted my neighbor's roof collapse. Mine won't let me date anyone. I respect her standards. You smile and move along, tempted by the smell of fried lentil cakes. Then the procession begins. At the front, dancers dressed as lionesses, stomping and spinning to drums. Behind them, priests carrying golden statues of Bastet, perched on ceremonial litters draped in white cloth and scented with myrrh. Each step sends the scent rippling through the crowd like invisible perfume. And bringing up the rear, you guessed it, cats. Dozens of them, each more pampered than the last. Some walk freely, others are carried in baskets lined with silk. One particularly majestic Siamese sits in a sedan chair held aloft by 4 sweating servants. You've never seen a cat look more judgmental, and that includes every house cat ever. Historians still argue whether real cats were used in these processions, or if symbolic statues took their place. But considering Egypt's deeply personal bond with their feline companions, most agree that at least some very real, very opinionated cats participated, whether they liked it or not. You see one leap off a platform mid-procession and sprint after a roasted duck. The crowd cheers. No one seems surprised. Then comes the fringe part. As night falls, the priests begin a chant. It's older than the temples themselves. Something about the balance between joy and danger, softness and power. A fire is lit in the center of the square, and around it, hundreds of people begin to purr. Yes, purr. They do it rhythmically in waves, low and steady. You thought it might be ridiculous until you feel the vibrations in your chest. Something primal, calming, connected. It's as if the very act of imitating the goddess's voice brings her attention down like a beam of moonlight. One woman near you weeps silently as she purrs, holding an old, torn collar. Someone else holds a carved wooden toy mouse and just hums along, eyes closed. You're not sure what it means or if you're doing it right, but the old man next to you leans in and whispers, "Now she hears us. Now she listens." A scholar once theorized that this purring ritual, the night humming of Bastet, wasn't about communication. It was about alignment, matching your inner rhythm with the divine. Not prayer, not praise, just resonance. And in that moment, with flickering flames, shadows dancing on the walls, and hundreds of people murmuring like a hive of dreamers, you get it. Bastet doesn't demand worship. She waits for you to purr. You wake the next morning unsure whether you actually slept or just drifted through some divine feline trance. Either way, the memory of the festival clings to your senses like incense smoke in your clothes. You're sticky with rose oil. Your ears are still humming, and you could swear there's cat hair in your mouth. But there's no time to reflect, because your next stop isn't a temple or a palace. It's a tannery. Not exactly where you expected your grand spiritual journey to lead, but history isn't always glamorous. Sometimes it's wet, smelly, and covered in pigeon poop. You hold your breath as you step into the courtyard. Workers bustle around pits of dye and soaking hides, sloshing water and waving away flies. But what catches your attention is the rows of meticulously wrapped, cat-shaped bundles laid out on long tables under linen canopies. This is a cat mummification workshop. And if that phrase sounds weird, well, it is. But here in ancient Egypt, cats weren't just companions or protectors. They were also sacred offerings, mummified and sold to pilgrims who wanted to gain Bastet's favor. Kind of like divine postcards, only more elaborate and covered in resin. You step closer to a table where a woman is carefully wrapping a cat's limbs with narrow strips of linen. Her hands are practiced, reverent. She works with the precision of someone who's done this 1,000 times and still treats it like a blessing. Her name was Tae, she says, not looking up. She protected my cousin from a snake. We're sending her to the temple now. You glance down. The bundle is tiny, but the linen is painted with red and gold bands, and the face has been carefully drawn in ink. Large eyes, noble whiskers, slight smile. Tae looks extremely pleased with herself. The woman gently places the finished mummy into a basket padded with reeds and herbs. Then she lifts another from a nearby pile, a small ginger, and begins again. Historians estimate that millions of cats were mummified over the centuries. Millions. Whole tombs have been found packed with feline mummies, sometimes stacked like firewood. And not all of them were personal pets. Some were bred specifically for ritual mummification, cat farms, essentially. It's a detail that feels oddly modern, industrial even, and it makes the whole practice feel darker, more complicated. Historians still argue about this economy of sacred sacrifice. Was it an expression of deep devotion, a form of spiritual commerce, or something closer to exploitation dressed in linen and gold? There are fringe accounts suggesting certain priests enhanced the power of the cat mummies by placing special objects inside. Amulets, coins, even bits of rare stone. One particularly unhinged scroll describes a singing cat mummy that would hum when warmed by the sun. You don't know if that's true. You hope not. That's way too creepy. But the deeper weirdness lies in the belief that even in death, these cats remained alert. A cat mummy wasn't just a relic. It was a vessel, a carrier of divine attention. Pilgrims would whisper secrets to them, leave them in tombs for protection, or even wear bits of linen as amulets. You hear one worker mutter, "Place her facing east. She watches for sunrise." Another adds, "Don't stack them. That one doesn't like heights." Are they joking? You honestly can't tell anymore. Before you leave, you pass a shelf of finished mummies, each one labeled in ink with short dedications. To Bastet, for healing my son's cough. To the stars, so she may chase them forever. For a safe childbirth. May her spirit guard the cradle. You pause at the last one. It's wrapped in blue-dyed linen, embroidered with tiny gold stars. There's something heartbreakingly gentle about it. You realize then that this isn't just a factory of death. It's a library of love. Every bundle, every stripe of linen, every inked-on smile is a story. A belief that cats don't just live beside us. They keep living long after us. You step outside, back into the bright sun, and brush lint from your tunic. It's cat hair. Of course it is. You're getting used to the smell of incense and sun-warmed fur. But today, the air carries something different. A sharp, metallic tang. You follow it through a quiet grove of sycamores, their wide branches casting dappled shadows over the sand. A priest is waiting by a low stone entrance carved directly into the hillside. Without a word, he gestures for you to follow. You descend into a cool, torchlit passage. The further you go, the quieter everything becomes. The world above vanishes behind sandstone walls and the soft echo of your footsteps. You're entering the feline necropolis, a subterranean labyrinth where thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, of cat mummies are interred in dark, sacred silence. At first, you don't believe what you're seeing. Wall after wall, shelf after shelf. Endless rows of carefully wrapped feline mummies, each resting in its own niche or stacked inside urns painted with protective symbols. The smell is a strange mix of myrrh, ancient resin, and time. Every so often, a meow echoes, not from a living cat, but from the torchlight bouncing through the narrow corridors, creating odd acoustics that sound like a meow, just distant and sad. This is no chaotic pile. It's organized reverence. You pass sections grouped by region, by temple, even by personality. One chamber bears a mural labeled "The Watchful Ones." Its walls adorned with cats in regal poses, all staring directly out at you. And then there's the largest tomb of all, a wide vaulted chamber, its ceiling painted with stars, and in the center, a golden sarcophagus the size of a human child. But it's not for a child. It's for Tamio, the most famous cat in Egyptian history. Tamio belonged to Crown Prince Thutmose, son of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, and when she died, she received a burial worthy of royalty. Her sarcophagus is inscribed with the phrase, "Beloved of the prince, silent guardian, gentle whisperer." Historians still argue whether this burial was a singular event or representative of a broader elite tradition. But the fact remains, Tamio was mummified, entombed, and honored like a princess. Her coffin is inlaid with silver whiskers. Her eyes are crafted from obsidian and polished lapis lazuli. You kneel before her and feel something you can't quite describe. Not fear, not even awe, just quiet. As you walk through deeper corridors, your torch flickers. You pass niches that are sealed entirely, marked with red symbols. One reads, "She sleeps uneasily. Disturb not." Okay, noted. You find yourself in another chamber, less decorative, more functional. Here, cats were placed not individually, but in clay jars, dozens to a jar. Mass-produced devotion. This is where the complexity of belief meets the machinery of ritual. Pilgrims wanted offerings. Temples needed funds. So cats were bred, sacrificed, and mummified in bulk. It's jarring. One moment you're in the presence of a beloved companion, honored with gold and song. The next, you're staring at rows of jars labeled like inventory. This is one of the harder truths of history. Reverence can coexist with commerce, love with utility, and even sacred cats weren't immune to being commodified. You hear a voice, soft, breathy, echoing through the stone. "She forgives." You turn. No one there. Maybe it's your mind playing tricks on you. Maybe it's the acoustics again. But something about that voice feels real. As you make your way out, the priest stops you. In his hands is a small token, a tiny amulet in the shape of a cat, tail curled, ears sharp, eyes narrowed just slightly. He presses it into your palm and nods. "She sees you," he says. "She remembers who comes." You emerge into daylight blinking and dazed. Cats were gods. Cats were messengers. Cats were currency. And now, they are eternal sleepers, curled up in stone beds beneath the earth. And maybe, just maybe, they're still listening. You've seen temples. You've followed festivals. You've tiptoed past sarcophagi containing cats with more gold than some pharaohs. But nothing prepares you for what happens next. You wake from a nap. Yes, another nap. Blame the incense, and find yourself in a private household courtyard. A modest one. No gilded columns or lion-headed priestesses here. Just a cracked clay floor, a washing line swaying in the breeze, and the smell of lentils boiling over a small fire. And sitting directly in the middle of it all, commanding the same level of authority as any royal statue you've seen so far, is a cat. A chubby, dusty-looking, deeply unimpressed tabby. She flicks her tail once. You blink. You've been allowed to stay. You're in the home of an ordinary Egyptian family. And here, away from temples and palaces, you begin to understand the domestic side of feline worship. Because cats weren't just sacred in temples, they were sacred in kitchens. On rooftops, in laps, you spot a small girl feeding bits of bread to two kittens. Her mother scolds her, not for wasting food, but for feeding them the crusts and not the softer middle. The daughter sighs and offers a better piece. The kittens approve. Inside the house, the father smears a salve across a scratch on his arm and mutters something like, "Blessings of Bastet, protect my idiot fingers." You're not sure if he's talking to the cat or to the goddess. And above the threshold of the house, etched into the wall, is a protective charm. A cat figure with a painted paw raised. Beneath it, the words, "No illness may pass while she watches." Historians often focus on temples and tombs, but look closely at the artifacts left behind. Amulets, figurines, frescoes, and you'll see that cats lived deeply integrated lives with the people. They were pest control, companions, guardians, muses, and sometimes just fuzzy troublemakers. One ostracon, a scrap of ancient pottery used like a notepad, reads, "Today, my cat walked across my papyrus. I have not forgiven her." It's not exactly high theology, but it is real. Fringe theories suggest that certain families believed their household cats carried ancestral spirits, passed down through generations. There are stories of cats who seem to remember old hiding places, recognize strangers, or refuse to leave a house even after a family moved away. You pass a shelf lined with tiny carved cats, some stylized, some crude, all clearly beloved. Next to them sits a cup of milk, gone sour. An offering, maybe, or a habit no one's questioned. The father notices you eyeing it. "She passed last week," he says, nodding toward the cup. "She liked milk every sunset. We don't stop just because she's gone." The daughter pipes up, "I think she visits in dreams." He pats her head, half smiling, not disagreeing. You spend the rest of the afternoon in their garden, which is more sand than greenery, but has just enough herbs to keep the cats interested. At one point, 3 of them sunbathe together in a patch of light, their paws twitching as they sleep. You find yourself lying down, too, and in that moment, everything clicks. The temples taught reverence. The processions taught joy. The necropolis taught legacy. But it's here, in this humble courtyard, with sun-warmed stone and the smell of lentils, that you see the full picture. Cats weren't worshipped because they were perfect. They were worshipped because they were present. They demanded respect, gave affection on their terms, punished arrogance, ignored everyone equally, and still managed to comfort and protect the people who believed in them. They were divine not just because of who they were, but because of how they made people feel. Safe, seen, slightly judged, but never alone. As the sun begins to set, the daughter asks if you'd like to stay for dinner. You look at the cat. She blinks slowly. You've been accepted. The last leg of your journey takes you far from homes and holy places, into the desert itself. No roads, no riverbanks, just golden dunes that stretch endlessly under a hot, humming sky. You're not entirely sure why you're here. Your guide, a quiet man with a face like sun-cracked leather, simply said, "Some stories can't be found in books, so here you are, bouncing along in a creaky cart pulled by a mule that looks mildly offended by existence." Hours pass. The wind kicks up, grainy and impatient. You wonder if this was all a mistake, until you spot them. Tracks, paw prints, dozens of them, crisscrossing the sand, deep enough to be fresh, clear enough to be real, and heading in one direction, toward a distant rock formation that juts up from the dunes like a shipwreck. Your guide doesn't speak. He just points. You follow the tracks on foot now, boots crunching softly, sweat beating at the small of your back. And just when you think the desert might swallow you whole, you reach the stones. They rise like broken fingers, carved not by humans but by wind and time. Nestled among them is a shallow cave, barely noticeable unless you're looking for it. And inside, a cat, of course. But this one is different. She's massive, panther-like, but sleek and eerily still. Her fur glistens like obsidian, eyes molten gold. She's curled atop a slab of stone that's been shaped into a low altar, with traces of old carvings. Nothing you recognize. Symbols older than hieroglyphs. Scratched, etched, remembered. She doesn't move. She's not asleep. She's waiting. You sit not because she commands it, but because your legs suddenly forget how to stand. The silence here is absolute. Not empty, but full of watching. And slowly, from the corners of the cave, others appear. More cats. Dozens. Small, lean, scarred. Some white, some ginger, some black as coal. They move with eerie precision, silent, synchronized, and form a wide ring around the obsidian queen. No one hisses. No one meows. This isn't a gathering. It's a congregation. You've stumbled onto something scholars don't talk about. Something that doesn't fit neatly into museum displays or textbook paragraphs. The desert vigil. Fringe accounts reference it vaguely. Tales of ancient cults that believed Bastet's true form lived in exile, far from temples corrupted by gold and politics. According to these scribbles, Bastet had once grown weary of being reduced to incense and merchandise. She withdrew to the wilderness, to watch from afar, to judge silently. This cave, if those rumors hold, is her last temple. And these cats, they're not just animals. They're her eyes, her ears, her messengers. You sit for what feels like hours, unmoving. At some point, the obsidian queen stands, stretches, and looks at you. It's not a curious glance. It's assessment. You feel the weight of every story you've heard, every paw print, every flicked tail, every ritual and whispered offering. She steps forward, not toward you, past you. She pads silently to the entrance of the cave, looks out across the desert, and meows. A single, short sound. Suddenly, the wind shifts. Hot air rushes in. You feel the pressure in your ears, the sting of sand against your skin. And then, she vanishes. Gone. No trace. No sound. The cats around you begin to move, dispersing like fog. One rubs against your leg before trotting off into the sunlight. Within minutes, the cave is empty again. You walk out dazed. Your guide is waiting at the cart, chewing on a date. He sees your face and says, "She still watches then?" You nod. "Good." he says. Then we can go. As the cart creaks back towards civilization, the desert behind you already swallowing your footprints, you realize something. Worship isn't always about ceremony. Sometimes it's about being chosen to witness, and sometimes cats choose. The wind follows you all the way back to the city, like a memory you haven't quite made sense of yet. You move through familiar streets, past incense stalls, temple courtyards, sun-warmed statues, with a strange calmness, as if something inside you has slowed down. Or maybe something inside you has finally curled up and gone to sleep. You pass a young man carving a small figurine of a cat, its back arched dramatically. "For good luck," he mumbles, though he doesn't look like he fully believes it. A few steps later, an old woman waves you away from her door, not unkindly but firmly, so her house cat can finish drinking from a painted bowl that says, "To she who watches the threshold." You're noticing the little things now, not just the murals of Bastet or the towering temple pillars, but the paw prints scratched into door frames, the fish bones left in corners like offerings, the way people instinctively step around sleeping cats, even when they're running late. You make your way to the rooftop of a quiet inn, where you once shared lentil stew with a poet who believed cats could sense earthquakes before they happened. His theory was unproven, but his cat was unusually jumpy. And as the stars come out, piercing and slow, you see something faint in the corner of the roof. A small shrine, just a stack of stones carefully arranged, with a single sprig of dried mint and a line of crushed red pigment. You realize you're not the first one to have walked this path, and you won't be the last. Cats have always slipped through the cracks of history. They appear in paintings but rarely in battle records. They don't start wars, build monuments, or draft treaties, but they watched it all. Every dynasty, every betrayal, every prayer muttered in the dark. And through it all, people kept feeding them, naming them, burying them with care, shaving their eyebrows in mourning, whispering to them in the night. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians truly worshipped cats, or if they simply projected divinity onto something they admired, something self-contained, unapologetic, something that could both kill a cobra and purr like a lullaby. You stretch out on the rooftop, the tiles warm against your back, and remember the voice in the necropolis. She forgives. Maybe that's all anyone really wanted from the gods. Not riches, not power, just to be seen, judged a little, and still loved anyway. A sleek black cat slinks out from behind a jar, curls up beside you, and begins to purr. You don't move, because for all the temples, scrolls, and buried whispers, for all the mystery and myth and mildly unsettling eyebrow-shaving customs, this might be the truest belief of all, that when a cat chooses to sit beside you, you are, for that moment, sacred too. The stars stretch overhead now, wide and endless, like a deep breath that never quite leaves your lungs. You're not sure how long you've been lying there, but time feels less like a line and more like a blanket, gently folded over your shoulders. The cat beside you sighs. It's the smallest sound, but it echoes like a blessing. The wind has settled. The air is soft. Even the crickets seem to sing a little more slowly now, their chirps lengthened like the syllables of a sleepy poem. All around you, Egypt sleeps. The temples are silent. The priests have gone home. The gods, you imagine, are curled up too, tails tucked neatly over divine paws, watching through half-lidded eyes as the world turns quietly below. You breathe in once more warm tiles, sun-dried grass, maybe just a hint of mint from the little rooftop shrine. It all blends into something soft, like the first page of a dream you haven't quite started. And if, in that moment, you feel a light weight on your chest, a soft purr against your ribs, don't worry. That's just Bastet. She's not here to smite or save, just to rest beside you, because even gods need a nap now and then. And you've earned one too. So close your eyes now. Let the past fade. Let the cats watch. Let the night purr. Sweet dreams.